They said, "Oh, doc, her days and nights are completely mixed up. She's like sleeping during the day and she's up all night." So that immediately alerted me that maybe this wasn't just an isolated agitation issue, but that this was more of an issue with her circadian rhythm. I think that the awareness that this can make cognition worse and that it can lead to dramatic changes in the behavior of the person, I don't think that that awareness is really out there. Welcome everyone to the Dementia Doc podcast. I am Dr. Miguel Rivera and I am joined by my wife Ganga. And today we are going to discuss a very interesting and critical aspect of our health in general, which is to be in sync or in rhythm with our internal clock.
Miguel, let's start with a story. You mentioned that you had a patient who had a disruption of the circadian rhythm, what we discussed today, and what happened?
So, it's a real patient, but it is also representative of something that I see over and over again in my practice. And what happened with this lady was that she went out to the hospital. I think she had a pneumonia. And when she came back from the hospital, within a day, they called me in to see her because she had all of a sudden become much more agitated, physically aggressive, exit-seeking, very difficult to redirect, completely acting out of character for her. When I spoke to the nursing staff and I asked them, "How is she sleeping?" They said, "Oh, doc, her days and nights are completely mixed up. She's like sleeping during the day and she's up all night." So that immediately alerted me that maybe this wasn't just an isolated agitation issue or sundowning, for example, but that this was more of an issue with her circadian rhythm. And that maybe if I could do things to readjust her circadian rhythm, she would come back to her previous state, which she wasn't agitated, and she was sleeping through the night and waking up at a regular time.
Yeah, and I want to stress that this disruption of her sleep, which led to disruption of her circadian rhythm, it wasn't that she just was a little bit agitated. Like if you're cold, that's a big issue. And if a psychiatrist is cold, most of the time, probably a psychiatrist prescribes a medication that is a heavy-duty calming medication. But the issue could be not even that the lady needs another medication, but the adjustment of the circadian rhythm.
Yes, and I think that, even though the idea of the circadian rhythm and the problems with the disruption of the circadian rhythm can cause, different health problems, I think that the awareness that this can make cognition worse and that it can lead to dramatic changes in the behavior of the person, I don't think that that awareness is really out there. This is why we're making this video, because it's something that I see frequently, and that, for example, my family members and my patients that are at home don't necessarily have this awareness, and I think that it is so important.
Yeah, and before we will discuss what did you do for the patient and in general, what are the simple steps that can be taken to adjust that, let's zoom in what circadian rhythm is, how it affects our health in general. Then we'll move in what happens with people who have dementia and how can caregivers help them and help themselves, because clearly if the person is not sleeping, it's really hard for a caregiver, and also caregivers can take care of themselves. So first, what is circadian rhythm?
Circadian rhythm is the idea that we have an internal clock. And the circadian rhythm is a clock that resets every 24 hours. So it is our sleep and wake cycle. Like we are supposed to be up during the day and we're supposed to be sleeping at night. And so this idea that we need to be in rhythm with nature, in rhythm with sunlight, it is something that few people recognize how important it is, but it is critical to the proper working of our physiology. Now, it is interesting that we also have other rhythms and other internal clocks in our body. And in some of these, we call them ultradian rhythms, and they are rhythms that happen more frequently than every 24 hours, like the beating of the heart, for example, and the secretion of certain hormones like human growth hormone. And we also have infradian rhythms, which happen less frequently than every 24 hours, like, for example, the menstrual cycle, which happens approximately every 28 days. So just to give an example of how critical this is, when the heart is out of rhythm, we call that an arrhythmia. And these arrhythmias can have profound implications in the health and quality of life of the person that has it. Some arrhythmias can lead to strokes, some arrhythmias, some people need pacemakers because they have an arrhythmia. So this, I think that the idea of living in rhythm and living in sync with nature and with sunlight is something that is critical for our health.
Yeah. And when you mention arrhythmia, I think everyone who hears that would say, oh yeah, of course, I can imagine what health consequences there could be once your heart is not pumping in rhythm. But I don't think we all realize the consequences if we disrupt the larger cycle that is not as fast as the heart. When that cycle is disrupted, that also brings major consequences. And what are those consequences? What do we know from studies and science today? What are the consequences?
So, when we look at people that do what we call shift work, so they work the graveyard shift and they are up when most people are sleeping. And so they're like in direct opposition of their circadian rhythm. And what the studies show is that these people have a higher incidence of significant health problems like cancer. They also develop dementia more frequently. It's definitely a big risk factor for dementia. It can also have significant implications for their mental health. So things like, depression and other mental health issues are also more frequently in people who do shift. Disruptions in circadian rhythm can affect even blood sugar levels, which can lead to diabetes and many other complications related to diabetes. So it is really quite critical to do what we can to be in sync with the sun.
Yeah, and it's clearly tightly connected to sleep. And sleep is a whole other subject for our health, cognition, mental state. But shift workers, in a way, sometimes people can't do anything to change their job. And there's probably something that they can at least compensate. But I think a lot of us are not shift workers. And we even discussed that we're not so good at going to bed before midnight, often past midnight, even though there is data that sleep before midnight could be much more restorative than sleep after midnight. So there is something about us scrolling on the phone, watching news, or super activating movies at night that could disrupt also us going to sleep. Also, when we eat, when we exercise, like all of the things that we may think, hey, I'm doing a good thing for myself. And of course, exercising, eating well is a good thing. But if we exercise at 10 p.m., it probably disrupts the whole rhythm of the body that it's now time to wind down to go to sleep. If we eat heavy meals, even if it's the most healthy meal late at night, it's not the same effect if you eat it earlier in the day.
Yes, absolutely. And, that reminds me of a pretty important application of that thinking, which is, for example, supplementation with vitamin D. We have all heard from different YouTube gurus and health practitioners and neuroscientists about the importance of vitamin D for a variety of things, for cognition, for mood, for immunity, for bone health. I mean, it is critical for us to have proper levels of vitamin D. So many people supplement. But in my experience, people take it whenever they feel like it. They take it in the evening before going to bed. They take it after dinner. They take it in the mornings. So it is very important to take vitamin D supplements in the morning because vitamin D, for example, is related to, and it's made when our skin is exposed to sunlight. So our body is physiologically ready to accept and assimilate the vitamin D during daytime hours. So whenever I prescribe vitamin D for my patients, I always prescribe it after breakfast because it's a fat-soluble vitamin, and if you take it on an empty stomach, the body won't absorb it. And then I also do it after breakfast because it is during those hours when the sun is up that our body is primed to receive that vitamin D. And I think that what you mentioned about diet, when is the proper time to eat, when is the proper time to exercise, all those things really, really matter. And there are other medical systems, like Ayurveda, for example, that are very keen on this. And they recommend that you do certain activities and you eat your meals and you rest and you go to sleep at particular times because they recognize the significant importance of doing things in sync with our natural rhythm.
Yeah. You mentioned before that there's some part of our brain that perceives light. Can you speak a little bit more about this and what happens to it as we age?
Okay, so yes, very important concept. So there is an area of the brain that is called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And it basically gets direct information from light from the eyes. So when the eyes perceive sunlight, they immediately send a signal to the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And this nucleus then shares that information with the hypothalamus and other areas of the brain. And that's how they know how to set the circadian rhythm, how to set the ultradian and the other rhythms in our body that are predicated on the existence or the perception of sunlight. And
so can I just ask
sure.
Just one question?
Mm-hmm.
So from that, we can infer that circadian rhythm is the main rhythm that gets all the other rhythms more in sync.
I absolutely, yes. The 24-hour cycle, this exposure to sunlight, let's say it's the stimulus by which all the other internal clocks are set. So yes, absolutely. And what happens with the suprachiasmatic nucleus is that as we age, it begins to malfunction. And also when people have Alzheimer's disease and other types of neurodegeneration, it can also affect how the suprachiasmatic nucleus works and its capacity to do its job.
Which sounds then that it's even more important to take care of our circadian rhythm as we age. Of course, I don't know the status. I don't know even if the scientists know that, let's say if we're out of sync, does it actually affect detrimentally that smart word that I cannot pronounce, that part of our brain, versus that when we are more in sync and it's more effective?
Yes, I think that it is important to have a kind of a proactive approach as we get older. And I think that this is where the prescription for sunlight really becomes critical, because again, the idea that neurodegeneration and aging can affect the suprachiasmatic nucleus is significant. But then also, the fact that this makes neurodegeneration worse, but that neurodegeneration itself then makes the job of the suprachiasmatic nucleus worse. So yeah, critically important to have that awareness that as we get older, this most important system of setting our internal clock can get affected so that we can then take the necessary steps to make sure that we are in sync.
Yeah. And let's now zoom in what happens with people who have dementia. You even mentioned the term sundowning that I think a lot of people are not familiar with. And I don't know whether I know you mentioned before it's for people get more agitated as the sun goes down. I don't think it's when it goes down that we can see the sun is setting, but it's maybe when the sun, peaks and then astrologically it starts this downward going down. I don't know how to call
Yeah.
that exactly in
Hmm.
the correct way. But it seems that there is something about this that maybe all of us can feel a little bit dip in the energy. I know I feel that is in the afternoons. That's when I would either do deep relaxation or sometimes exercise a little bit. So I would think that once the brain does not have its full capacity, those dips in the energy, or which seems to be very connected with sun, affect people with dementia even more.
Yes, absolutely. I think that we have all said, I am so tired that I can't even think straight. And I think that, that is definitely one of the things that I see a lot with sundowning is that, for example, if people take a nap right after lunch and the brain gets a chance to recharge, the sundowning gets less or it can disappear. So the use of a nap is something that is significant. Now, it is important to note that the studies showed that circadian rhythm disruptions are a major risk factor or a major cause for the development of sundowning. And again, that's part of why I shared this story that I shared was that I got called in because my patient was severely agitated. And my assessment was, well, instead of giving medications for agitation for this patient, we need to address the circadian rhythm disruption.
And so, can you highlight a little bit more what exactly is sundowning? That maybe some people see the effects of that, but they don't even know that it's called sundowning.
Sure. And, like if you go to a dementia unit or a memory unit in the morning, it looks completely different than if you go in the afternoons. Because most people, and I think some of the studies say that approximately 2/3 of people with moderate to severe dementia have sundowning. So sundowning is this idea that let's say, in the afternoon hours at some point, people begin to get or can get more confused, more disoriented, and in many cases more agitated. They can become exit seeking. They can say, I need to go pick up my children. I need to get out of here. I don't live here. Why are you holding me prisoner? And so it can create significant disruption in the quality of life of the person, and it can also make things quite difficult for the caregivers, particularly if this person is living at home and they have a spouse or a child taking care of them, because the agitation can be dramatic. So I think that to have this awareness that the circadian rhythm disruption can be a major factor in the development of sundowning is something really worth realizing for sure.
And also, if we zoom into the fact that if a person with dementia gets their days and nights mixed up, like it again can increase their agitation and bring all this havoc. And as you mentioned, if the person is at home, it's so difficult for a caregiver because now they are up all night with the person, and then they still need to do their chores and tasks and work during the daytime.
Yes.
So how do I think you see families like that, and what is your advice to them, or I know what do you witness to say about this?
Well, I would say that it is a common reason why family caregivers, spouses in particular, begin to really wonder whether their loved one needs to be placed. I mean, I have case after case after case where the family member has come, Doc, I haven't slept for 3 weeks. I don't know if I'm going to make it. I am getting sick myself. I'm getting short-tempered and angry with them because I haven't had any sleep. So that immediately triggers a conversation about the circadian rhythm and what are some of the fairly simple steps that we can take to try to get the person back in sync with their internal clock.
And it sounds like this is the good moment to actually say what are the simple steps that people can do. First, let's zoom into people with dementia. So if someone has a person with dementia and their days and nights are mixed up, circadian rhythm disrupted, what can they do? What did you do for your patient?
Okay. So listen, before I go into that, because this is also an important issue that I didn't mention, when talking about dementia, we talked about sundowning, but also circadian rhythm disruption is associated with cognitive decline. So not only is it a risk factor for developing dementia, it can also make dementia worse because of its direct effect on sleep. And when the sleep is fragmented, and for example, when the REM sleep or rapid eye movement stage of sleep is affected, that can interfere with what is called memory consolidation. And let me give you an example. Like you read something today, you're studying for a test, and you read something today. So when you go to sleep during the REM period, the brain takes those memories and that learning that you did and goes through a process of cementing it into long-term memory so that when you wake up in the morning, you remember it. That's why, it's interesting, but the studies show that people who pull all-nighters don't do as well because the brain doesn't have they haven't slept. And it is during sleep that we consolidate what we have experienced into long-term memory. So that is a really important issue. The sleep fragmentation and the problems with sleep, that's why it's both a risk factor and also an exacerbating factor for people who already have dementia. So definitely, worth thinking about. Now, your question was, what are some of the things that we can do to reestablish the circadian rhythm? And I think that we've already mentioned several times exposure to light. And this is, again, particularly in the morning hours, soon after awakening. It is important to, brush your teeth, do your personal hygiene, and step outside for, 10 minutes. If it's full sun is out, here in Florida, maybe 5 to 10 minutes. If it's cloudy, then maybe 15 minutes. But it's important to get that sunlight early in the day. It makes a dramatic difference, not only in sending that information from the eyes to the suprachiasmatic nucleus so that our body can get in sync with nature, but also in how it relates to, for example, serotonin production, which is one of the neurochemicals that is directly related to our mood. And we know that exposure to light boosts serotonin levels. So for so many reasons, exposure to light is key. Number two, certain things like, for example, physical activity. Getting your exercise and your physical activity done during daytime hours. It is not good for the body for us to exercise late in the day, particularly if we do that fairly strenuously. I mean, we can do a little bit of stretching, for example, and that would be okay. But to do strenuous exercise in the evening hours can directly affect sleep. Number three is to make sure that you eat your meals at the proper intervals, that you eat your breakfast, your lunch, and your dinner at consistent times. And for example, that you're not eating a heavy meal late in the day. You want to give yourself at least 3 hours between your last meal and the time in which you go to bed at night, because that is what is most conducive to a proper sleep architecture that night. Also paying attention to sleep hygiene, making sure that you have a routine for going to bed that you follow. Like, for example, we love taking a shower about an hour before going to sleep. and then making sure that their room is quiet, that their room is cool, that you have avoided bright lights for at least 2 hours before going to bed. Avoiding screen time, no iPad, minimizing TV, definitely minimizing the phone use and scrolling and things like that. So I think that those are, in general, some of the most important and, let's say, simple ways of getting our circadian rhythm back in sync.
So with that patient that we started with, you advised to take the patient out to get sunlight in the morning.
I
And what
sure
happened?
did. So I did a couple of things for this patient. So I made sure that, yes, that they took her out every single morning as soon as she woke up, and did her, again, her personal hygiene, and had a little bit of breakfast, and then to take her outside for 10 minutes every day. And then I also gave her some melatonin, which is something that can definitely help to reset the circadian rhythm. So I gave it to her for, I think it was 5 days. So I was giving her some melatonin to help her, fall back asleep in the evening. And melatonin, like I said, it has been shown to be helpful in reestablishing the circadian rhythm, coupled with then making sure that the patient went out every single morning for sunlight. And within 3 days, the patient was better. And at the end of the 5 days, she was no longer agitated. Instead of waking up around 11 o'clock in the morning, she was waking up at her usual time of like 8 o'clock in the morning. She was participating in activities, and the sundowning completely disappeared, without putting her on any heavy duty medicines to calm her down. Because again, the issue was not the agitation, and the issue was that she was out of sync with her internal clock. She was out of sync with the rhythm of nature.
And it's also a reminder, I think, to all of us, whether someone is a caregiver or having aging parents or just we live our life, that if a person with cognitive reserve that is not that strong can recover that fast from just getting exposure to sunlight, can you imagine how fast it can improve our mood, or in general, the effect that it has on our health? And I also want to note when you said about getting exposure to sunlight, if someone goes on a walk, do not wear sunglasses in the morning. You do want those 5 minutes of, like, actually, you don't need to directly look at the sun, but you do want to get the sunlight, not through sunglasses.
Yeah, great point. Yes, don't go outside and then put sunglasses on.
Yeah, and recently we also discussed a simple point that can be fixed, like hearing loss, that can affect our cognition. And if you want to watch this video, click on the link here. And thank you for being here, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us.